I've owned my 2022 Toyota Tacoma TRD Off-Road 4x4 for about 2 years now, and the only thing I like about the new 2024 is the giant 14-inch screen. Well, CartrimHome has just released their new 14.6-inch infotainment screen that is a direct fit into any third-gen Tacoma, and this thing is sick. Stay tuned while we see what comes in the box, exactly how it installs, setting it up, and some configuration to make it your own. Hey guys, Rich here from Tacoma Network, and today we're taking a look at the brand new CartrimHome C12 for the 2016 to 2023 third-gen Toyota Tacoma. This is a massive 14.6-inch multimedia screen, meant to fit directly with minimal tools and plug-and-play experience. I'll have a link in the video description that shows pricing and options for this unit. Inside the box, you'll get the main C12 screen and several bags of wires, brackets, and parts, but let's go more in depth. The first bag, you'll get a black USB adapter, a small adapter box, and a large wiring harness. Bag 2, you get a gray USB adapter and a smaller wiring harness. The next bag, you get the black metal bracket to secure the screen to the dash. The fourth bag has various coaxial adapters, 2 variations of USBs, a GPS antenna, and 4G antenna. Bag 5 is several trim tools, which I found I didn't really need for the install. And finally, some connector caps and 4 screws for that bracket, although you only need 2. Now for the star of the show, the CartrimHome C12. This thing is massive and well done in my opinion. It's all one piece that incorporates the 2 redirected middle dash vents and the large 14.6-inch screen in the center. It uses the same top and bottom trim that's found on the stock unit, and all of the same clips to help mount this, keeping an OEM look. Overall, the unit is very thin and doesn't protrude either into the dash or out from the dash. I opted for the black vented version to keep the theme of my interior as black. Flipping it over to the business side, you'll see how they redirected the 2 vents to fit that large screen in between. The center section is an Android 12 based unit that's capable of both Android Auto and Apple CarPlay wirelessly. And yes, it will work with the older third gens without CarPlay. My unit came with OEM clips already attached. Some quick measurements see that the display size is indeed 14.6 inches. The overall diagonal is 16.5. The screen width is 14 inches. And the overall width including vents is 19.5 inches. Let's go get this installed. The only tools you'll need are a 10mm socket and a Phillips screwdriver. First, you'll need to break the trim and vents away from the dash. Just grab the right side and pull out towards you. About 10 to 12 clips are holding this on. If it's the first time being removed, it might be a little tough to break. There's no wires or anything attached to this piece. Now, you'll use your 10mm socket to remove the 4 bolts holding the factory touchscreen in. You will need 2 of these bolts for this C12 bracket later in this install. Pulling the radio out, you'll find quite a few wires attached. Start unplugging all of the wires that are attached to the factory radio. There's no need to notate which are which, as all of them are slightly different. The radio should be completely free now. Back in the shop, I have the C12 unit upside down to give some orientation to the bracket. There are 2 mounting holes on either side of the top of the screen. The bracket is keyed, so it can only fit one way. Pro tip, remove the 2 access caps now before you install the screen. I used a small flathead screwdriver to depress the clip. They're marked with L and R as they are unique to each side. Mounting the bracket is easy. The driver's side will have 2 holes and the passenger only 1. This allows the plastic clip that protrudes to key into the bracket. Use 2 of the 10mm drive bolts from the factory radio to install the bracket with a 10mm socket wrench. The bracket allows for the heft of the larger screen to be solidly attached versus just using clips. Before we install the screen, let's do some pre-work in the shop. I've laid out all of the wires that will work on my non-jbl 22 TRD off-road. I have them in order from left to right. The kit will have wires that you will not need, but these worked for me. Starting with the GPS antenna, the 4G antenna, the backup camera harness, dual USB harness, gray USB adapter, supplement harness that includes an external mic, the small main wiring harness, and the adapter box. Starting with the 4G antenna, this plugs in the bottom left corner. Next is the GPS antenna that goes in right above the 4G. Both of these can be slightly tightened with an 8mm open-ended wrench. Just don't over-tighten them. Now we're moving on to the top row of plugs, starting with the backup camera harness, the dual USB harness, the USB adapter, the supplement harness with external mic, and finally the smaller main wiring harness. This will use the black plug located vertically on the right side. This will have one smaller white plug that gets plugged in above. Here's how these all look. Now let's plug some things into each other, starting with the radio antenna, which goes in the upper left corner. Next is the adapter box, which goes into the white plug on the main wiring harness. Now on the supplement harness, you'll see a tiny black plug. This gets plugged into the only wire that came out of the screen originally. Lastly, the backup camera gets plugged in from backup camera harness to the main wiring harness. This will not be the only yellow plug, so verify you grab the correct ones. Here's some items I didn't use for my install. The larger of the two wiring harnesses, the black USB adapter, the single USB harness, 2 of the OEM radio bolts, 2 of the small included screws for the bracket, and extra caps. However, I did place caps on open-ended RCA plugs. It's now time to get the screen installed, but here's a pro tip. Use a small box upside down over the shift lever to give yourself a platform to rest the screen. I placed a microfiber towel just to protect things. Now it's a matter of finding the plug on the C12 screen that fits the plug from the dash. Make sure each plug is fully seated and clicked in. Attempt to pull them apart just to verify. Each plug is unique and you can't plug the wrong one in. Once all the plugs from the C12 screen have been plugged into the dash, you are complete. I did have 2 larger and 2 smaller plugs from the dash that were no longer needed. They can hang free now. Pro tip, drop the wiper stock all the way down so you won't hit it when installing the screen. Make sure all of the wires are now inside of the dash through the small OEM radio opening. Double check that there are no wires protruding as you align the circular vents and that top bracket. I ended up aligning the bracket with my fingers towards the top. Just push the 10 to 12 clips in and check around the dash that there's no gaps. Adding the 2 screws at the top can be a little tricky as they're hard to see. I used a small screwdriver to make sure everything was seated and then just a Phillips driver to screw the bolt in. Make sure you don't over tighten these. Here's my first startup. And it all worked. I got the wiring on my first try, not bad. Setting up your C12 for Apple CarPlay is pretty easy. Just connect your iPhone's Bluetooth to SYU-Android. You can find specifics on this in the Bluetooth app and Bluetooth setup. I had to forget this device once and then it connected. You should see it in your list when you're away from your truck. And getting to Apple CarPlay is pretty easy as well. Just select the Apps button, then CarLink 2.0, which houses Apple CarPlay. Getting back to the Android screen, you do have a back button, and then you're back. To set up your C12 to always launch Apple CarPlay, click on the Settings, then User, then Application Settings, and toggle on CarLink 2.0. This will tell your C12 that every time you start your truck to launch Apple CarPlay. And here's what the starting sequence looks like. In 15 seconds or less, your Apple CarPlay will be up and running. I've had several wireless dongles that took easily twice as long. Now, pretty much I can have Apple CarPlay up and running before I leave my driveway. As for steering wheel controls, they fully work. Volume up and down, and next song, previous song. Although I noticed the next song, previous song were reversed now on the C12, but there's a fix for this. If you back into the Android side, click on the App button, and now SWC for steering wheel control. Although I haven't messed with it yet, this looks to be the place to reverse that back to stock. I found that the stock C12 audio was quite flat. So if you go into the Apps button and then Equalizer, you have full control of the sound. There are preset sound stages, and I found Jazz, for some reason, to be the best sound. At the bottom, you have more options for cabin focus, or what we used to call balance and fader. And yes, the rear speakers now have a bit more amplification. You also have surround strength and control for bass and subwoofer filters. If you go into vehicle settings, you'll find most of the controls the stock unit had for controlling your Tacoma, like trip info, history info, base info, TPMS, and the setup menu that has all of the specifics for a ton of options. Not sure if it's all hooked up to a setting, but it's there. Diving more into the menu system on the Android side, there's quite a bit, and some of them have multiple ways to get there. You have Wi-Fi at the top, device, general, factory, user, and system. Factory is password protected, but it's 3368, and you'll have a ton of settings, but be careful in there. To change time on your C12, simply click the time date on the Android home screen. You'll have options to use your phone's date and time and set your time zone. Back on the Android home screen, you do have the option to change the color of the truck and personalize the license plate. Deeper in the menus, you can swap this vehicle out, but I like this version. The truck on the Android home screen is somewhat animated, showing lights on, brake lights, blinkers, door ajar, along with some pretty cool drive mode animation. So we're doing a little drive test with the drive mode animation. I forgot to enable the maps, but that would be engaged as well. You'll see the speed, brake lights, blinkers, and the potential turns in the road by the steering wheel movement. The reverse or backup feature is not the best due to the limitations of the Toyota camera and wiring, but it gets the job done, just slightly pixelated. At night, your LED plate lights are really amplified with this larger screen, but I'll be working on a fix for that here soon. To have the full Android experience with an iPhone, you will need to connect via hotspot on the Wi-Fi menu. Once connected, you'll have full video display on the C12, and it's quite impressive. You can launch the YouTube app, and you have full control as if you're on a desktop computer. Simply launch your favorite video, and just skip the commercials. Hey guys, Rich here from Tacoma Network. In this video, I'm going to show you my top 5 favorite exterior upgrades. Since I've only been using the C12 for about a week, my pros and cons list is quite small, but let's start with the cons. Although the vents seem to put out as much, if not more air, they only swivel left and right. They do not swivel up or down and cannot be closed off completely. No instructions were included in the box, which is the main reason I'm doing a video on this, to help some people out. Also, no bags were labeled to identify which wiring to use. I had to rule out which ones not to use. The menus on the Android side are not user-friendly. Many of the screens can be obtained multiple ways, and it seems like screens were picked from different places, not having a uniform look. As for the pros, we have to start with the obvious. Screen size matters. Just look at this thing. It's so well designed, incorporating the vents and widening the opening, but still keeping the same look as the stock trim piece. It has a 90% OEM look, as it nearly looks factory, which most screen upgrades on the market cannot claim. The interface getting to Apple CarPlay is rock solid. My previous wireless dongle would malfunction at least 4 to 5 times a week. In the week that I've had the C12, it connected consistently and in half the time. The overall configurability of the C12 is amazing. It seems like there's always a way to customize each function somewhere in the menus. And finally, it's 100% plug and play. Although it was harder to identify the correct wiring, everything plugged right in. There was no splicing or troubleshooting after the install. It just worked on my first try, and most screen upgrades can't claim that. Well, that's a wrap on the CartrimHome C12 screen install. I can't tell you how exciting it is to hop in my 2-year-old truck now. It's brought back that new truck feeling. There's still some small quirks to figure out, like the backup camera quality and getting the temperature to display in Fahrenheit versus Celsius, but this is probably my favorite upgrade to date on my Tacoma. As always, if you like the video, there's a button for that, and if you haven't already, subscribe to not miss another Tacoma Network video. Finally, my name is Rich. Thanks for watching.